Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today's lesson is going to be on the rules for adding integers. Now, we're not going to be using calculators. We have to be able to use our calculator between our ears, which is our brain, to figure out how to add integers. Now, before we can start adding integers, we actually need to know what an integer is. So, what are integers or an integer, right? Integers are, right, should be are, any number in the following set, okay? And you can think about integers as the numbers on a number line. So a number line is a line with arrows on each end, and usually there is a 0 in the middle. When you go to the right, it is positive, and each little tick on that number line represents an integer. So if we go to the right from 0, we hit the first tick, which is +1, then +2, then +3, then +4. Now you don't have to put the positive sign in front of those positives, so you could just write 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, etc. Now it doesn't stop there. That's what this arrow represents. That's only as big as we've drawn our number line. So another way of showing this goes on forever is also to put 3 dots at the end, okay? Now, to the left of the 0, if we go to the left, we're heading in the negative direction. So each tick on our number line going to the left is going to represent a negative integer. So left of the 0 is -1, then -2, then -3, -4, -5, -6, -7, etc. Now, we do have to write the sign for negatives. And again, the arrow going to the left means that it doesn't stop, it goes on forever. We could also put 3 dots to represent that as well, okay? Now, you'll notice that integers are like these whole numbers that are positive or negative, or the neutral like the 0, okay? There's no decimals here, there's no fractions here, okay? That's what integers are. So now we need to start being able to add integers together. So I'm going to give us some options, some different ways of being able to do this, okay? To start off with, I'm going to be talking about adding integers using a number line, okay? Now, when we do this, we want to put our pencil at the 0, or we're going to start at the 0. And then we're going to move to the first integer. Now, remember, you're going to move to the right if it's positive, and you're going to go to the left if it's negative. And you go the number of spaces that the integer represents. So if we're starting at +5, we're going to go 5 steps or 5 little ticks in the right direction. Once you've gone to the first integer, then from that first integer, you're going to move to the second integer. And again, depending on the sign, you're going to move to the right if it's positive, and you're going to move to the left if it's negative. And when you do that, you're going to place arrows to represent those integers, and you're going to show the movement with an arrow. Which direction are we going? And we're going to place them tail to head. So the tail of the second integer goes on the head of the first integer. And then where you end is actually your answer. So let's go through a couple of examples. So here is our first question. We're going to take +2 and we're going to add +4 to it. So the first thing we need to actually do is to draw a number line. Okay, so let's draw a line. Maybe I'll put it over here. And we have arrows on the end of that line. Now remember that 0 is in the middle, and when we go to the right, each little tick, they're evenly spaced apart, are going to be positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Going to the left of the 0, each little tick is going to represent another integer, so negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. So we're going to place the first integer on that number line. So we start at 0, and I'm going to start above, and I'm going to put a dot there for the start. Now what's happening? I'm going to go in the positive direction 2. So I got to move in the positive direction, that's to the right, 2 spaces. So 1, 2 spaces, and I'm going to put an arrowhead on there to show the direction that I went. Okay? Now I'm going to write the value of the arrow up above it as well. So that arrow represents positive 2. That is the positive 2 integer. Now, I'm going to add to that positive 4. So my next integer is still going to go in the positive direction, but I'm going to start where I left off here. So I left off at 2, so I'm going to start at 2, and I'm going to go in the positive direction. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to end up there. And that arrow represents positive 4, so I'll put its value. So where I end here is going to be our answer. And in fact, I haven't drawn enough numbers, but if we go to the next integer, it would be 6 in the positive direction or on the positive side. So our answer is actually going to equal positive 6. Okay? Let's try another one. Okay? So I've thrown some negatives in here. So again, let's draw a number line. All right. And we'll put 0 in the middle. When we go to the right, it's going to be positive. So we'll have positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To the left is negative, each tick. So making my ticks, and then negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. So my first integer is now negative 2. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to go in the negative direction, 1, 2. Okay? And so that arrow represents negative 2 integer. Then I'm going to go to my second integer, which is positive 4, and I start where I left off from my first integer. So I'm going to be sitting at negative 2. And I'm going to move to positive 4. That means I'm going to go in the positive direction 4 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. And where I finish up, where the head of the arrow is, that's my answer. So in this case, we can see that the answer is positive 2. Okay, so let's put the answer on the line. All right, one more. Positive 2 plus negative 4. So again, let's draw a number line. We'll put 0 in the middle, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 ticks to the right is what I've got. So they become 1, 2, 3, 4 in the positive direction. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 in the negative direction. Whoops, what am I doing here? So negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. So again, we start at the 0, and our first integer is positive 2. So that means we're going to go 1, 2 spaces in the positive direction. So that represents positive 2. And then we need to move from there to negative 4. So I put my tail where my head was at positive 2, and I'm going to go to in the negative direction. So that's to the left 4 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that arrow represents negative 4. And where we end up is our final answer. So our answer here is in fact negative 2. Okay? So that's how it works if we're using a number line. Now, I'm going to talk about integers a lot in terms of temperature, okay? So if we think about integers like temperature, right? I'm thinking that you recognize that positive integers, right, are going to be like hot temperatures, right? Red hot. Negative integers are going to be like cold. And what happens when we add hot and cold together? Well, that's really just like what happens in real life. In real life, we look at the thermometer outside to figure out the temperature. And somewhere on the thermometer, there's a 0. And if we go up, it's positive. If we go down, it's negative. And again, each step on that thermometer would go up and increase by 1. And it would also decrease by 1 if we're going down. Okay? So let's think about that in terms of hot and cold. If we add hot and cold together, they kind of cancel each other out and we don't have any hot or any cold left. If you have more cold than you do hot, then it should be a cold temperature. If you have more hot than you have cold, then it should be a hot temperature. Okay, so let's think about this in terms of a rule. So drawing number lines takes up a lot of space and it's quite slow. So there's another way to add integers that's a little bit faster if you can just remember the rules. And thinking about temperature is going to help us in doing this, okay? So addition rules. So there's a first rule here. And this first rule says if the signs are the same. That means if we're adding a negative to a negative, or a positive to a positive. So that's like hot added to hot or cold added to cold. How do we get to the answer? Well, the easiest thing to do is just to add the numbers, right? If you add hot and hot together, you're going to get a bigger hot, right? It's going to get hotter. And we're going to take their sign. So if their sign is hot, then the answer is going to be hot in the end. Okay? Let's look at this example here. Here we have signs that are the same. So positive 2 represents hot 2 and positive 6 represents hot 6. So if we add hot to more hot, it's going to get hotter. So what do? We add the numbers. 6 plus 2 gives us 8. And we take their sign. It's going to be a hot answer or positive. Right? Let's look at the second example. If we have cold 3 and we're going to add more cold to it, our answer is going to get even colder. So those signs are the same. We take their sign, so it's going to give us a colder temperature, right? Or a cold answer. And what do? Cold added to more cold gets colder, so 3 plus 5 gives us 8, and there's our answer, -8 for that one. Okay, so that's if the signs are the same, hot to hot or cold being added to cold. So what happens if they're different signs? So if the signs are different, that means one positive and one negative. Well, the easy way to get to the answer is, in fact, to subtract the numbers. And many of you are saying, well, why would we subtract on an add question? And that's because when we mix hot and cold together, the hot cancels, some of the hot cancels some of the cold. And we have to figure out how much is left over at the end. And that's exactly the same thing that happens when we subtract. Okay? And then how do we decide what sign if they're both different? Well, you're going to take the sign of the larger. Now, some people say, well, positives are always bigger than negatives, and that's true, but that's not what I mean here. When I say take the sign of the larger, I mean, what do you have more of? Do you have more cold or do you have more hot? If you have more cold, the answer is going to be negative. If you have more hot, the answer is going to be positive. Okay, let's go through a couple of examples here. So we'll start with this one. We're starting with positive 5 and negative 2. Well, what do we have more of, right? Well, we've got more positives. So that means our answer is going to be positive. So when we think about hot being added to cold, because there's more hot than cold, our answer is still going to be hot. Now, what happens when we add different signs together? Well, 2 of these negatives, which is the smaller amount, is going to cancel 2 of these. If we cancel 2 of those, what is left? There's 3 left, right? So the answer, in fact, is going to be positive 3, okay? Because 3 plus 2 gives us that 5, and 2 of those cancel 2 of those, and you have 3 left. Well, the easiest way to do that is 5 subtract 2. Take the numbers away. That gives you 3. Okay? Let's go to the next example. Negative 7 plus positive 3. Well, what do we have more of in this case? Well, we've got more negatives, right? So we know our answer is going to be negative. So 3 positives, is going to cancel 3 negatives. How many are left when we take 3 from here? Well, there's going to be 4 left. So the answer is going to be negative 4. 7 take away 3 gives you 4. Okay? Let's go to a third example. Now, I wanted to actually put a, what do I want to do? Put a negative sign in here. Okay, because it needs to be different, that's right. Okay, so sometimes on our examples or on our questions, we don't have a sign on a number. So we have to remember, if there's no sign, what is it? It is positive. We assume it is positive. So now we have different signs, okay? So what do we have more of? That's going to determine what the sign of the answer is. Well, 8 positives and 12 negatives, so we have more negatives. So our answer is going to be negative. So what happens? 8 of these, because that's a smaller amount, is going to cancel 8 of those. How many are left? Count up, that's easiest. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you can see we have 4 left. Another way you can do it is just subtract the numbers 12 minus 8, and that also gives you the 4. Okay? Taking the sign of the larger, though. Okay, one last way of doing addition with integers is using integer discs. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit of practice with this. So using integer discs. Well, what are integer discs? They're a little bit like bingo chips. Okay, you probably used those in elementary school. We're not going to play with the bingo chips. We're just going to draw circles for the discs. Okay? Now, when you draw them, if it's a positive, you're going to place a plus symbol in the middle, okay? If it is a negative, you're going to put a negative symbol in the middle, okay? And then what happens? When you have 1 positive and 1 negative put together, that becomes a 0. So we're going to then cross out the zeros. Okay, so we'll cross out those pairs of 1 positive and 1 negative, and those become zeros. And then what's left is our answer. So let's look at the first example. So 2 positives. So I'm going to draw 2 circles, and I'm going to put plus signs in them. Now, it's easiest if we kind of match up all the positives on one row and all the negatives on another row, because then it's just easier to cross out your zeros. Okay? Okay? So now we're going to add to that negative 5. So that means I have to draw 5 circles for discs and put negative signs in them. And then you should clearly be able to see that this is a positive and a negative that will cancel each other out and become a 0. This is another positive and a negative that will cancel each other out and become a 0. And what we have left here is, in fact, the answer. So the answer is going to be negative 3. Okay? Let's look at one more example, okay? So 3 positives we're going to draw. 1, 2, 3 circles, put positives on them. And then we're going to draw 7 negatives. So we're going to do another row just below it with a negative. So I'm drawing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 circles with negative signs in it. So I've done the positives, I've done the negatives. Now I have another set of 4 positives. So I'm going to draw another 4 discs, and they go in the same line with the positives. Put your plus signs in them. And now what's going to happen? A 0, a 0, a 0, a 0, a 0, a 0, a 0. Nothing is left. So the final answer is, in fact, just 0. All right. We'll move on to your assignment, practicing the adding of integers, and we'll see you soon. Take care.